Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. So we figured, since we still don't know who our president is, and this seems to be one of those crazy elections, we thought maybe we should talk about another crazy election.
Yeah, kind of show that the 2020 election, which we're not going to get into for a variety of reasons, but a candidate not conceding, a candidate claiming that the outcome was corrupt, was not legit, is nothing new in American politics.
Not at all. So today, Tom, what are we talking about?
Today we'll be looking at the election of 1824 and the so-called corrupt bargain.
We're also going to kind of hit up a little bit of the election of 1828 as well. I think they kind of go together.
Yeah, it's definitely it's the sequel. It's The Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, basically. Which is interesting because Empire Strikes Back is more superior to the original Star Wars. I don't care what people say.
And it was definitely better than the prequels and the...
You're such a hater of the prequels. All right, so yeah, to definitely go...
The originals were better, that's all. That's another podcast. That's another podcast.
So, now that we got Indeed and another podcast out of the way. Yeah, so the elections of 1824 and the election of 1828 are, as Tom said, they go together, and they both deal with two candidates. One of them being John Quincy Adams, and the other one being Andrew Jackson. And just when you thought the 2020 election was kind of nuts, these are kind of nuts.
Yes,
right?
without doubt.
I think what we should start off with is kind of the background of how we even get to this election and how these guys wind up running and what's really happening in the country at the time. What is known as the era of good feelings. After the War of 1812, which was our second war against England, which started, in 1812. Hence, I have students ask me, "Oh, when did the war happen?" It's called the War of 1812.
Yeah, but when did it happen? I think they're just messing with us. They have to just mess with us.
I know, they totally are. They totally are. All right. So after the War of 1812, where we most definitely did not win.
But we didn't lose. That was the main thing.
And that was the main thing.
We were able to stand up. We were able to go toe-to-toe with the British, at least sometimes.
Yes, somewhat. And then we didn't lose. So it wasn't a war we won, but we did not lose. And out of that, few things come out that are very relevant to the elections of 1824 and 28 that we talk about today. One of them is the sheer fact that this is what made Andrew Jackson become a national figure.
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson won a major battle in the Battle of New Orleans. No, I went to the battlefield. It was actually a really cool battlefield. I was there a couple years ago. And that kind of propels him to become a national figure. And another thing that happens because of over 1812 is, I guess, twofold. There is a strong feeling of just nationalism and patriotism and, the well-being of one's nation above sectional, tendencies of North, West, South. We are all American. Based on what I was reading, a lot of people wind up getting tattoos of like American Eagle and American flags following the War of 1812.
There's a lot of patriotism. People were very proud. People were very proud. It was kind of when America also on a world stage kind of got recognized. All right, now they're a real country type of
yes.
thing. That's why it's often the War of 1812 is a lot of times also referred to as the Second War for Independence. Mm-hmm. Not that there was a chance that the country was going to be retaken over by the British. That wasn't going to happen. But again, it kind of just reestablishes the United States and as a country. It's not going anywhere. Here we are. Let's go. What's our future? Very, very optimistic for the future after that time.
Yep. And when the war started, there was essentially two political parties that entered this war. You had the Democratic Republicans that stemmed from Thomas Jefferson. And by this time, they're kind of starting to call themselves simply Republicans. They dropped the whole Democratic part. And they're Republicans. And then the other party that's kind of on the outs here is the Federalist Party. This is the original party of George Washington. And the Federalist Party, at least a faction of it, during the War of 1812, were a proponent of At one point even like secession from the United
Yeah,
States,
talk of that. Yeah.
of the northern portion, because they were so anti-war. They were very much against it. And while the United States, as Tom mentioned, did not win this war, we definitely did not lose it. And this fervor, this idea of wow, it's awesome to be an American, kind of led to the Federalist Party being shunned. Like, hey, you know what? You never believed in us, and kind of fell apart.
There's still some Federalists in the government, but as far as presidential elections, they don't really have any real
Done.
power.
Yes, they're
There's still
done.
people that look back at the Federalist Party at this time with some looking at them in a good light, have some of their similar
Hmm.
ideals,
Hmm.
but it's mostly the majority of the government is going to be that Democratic Republican government. Yeah.
That's just kind of what brings us to the election of 1824. A few events are happening at this time. And while this era of supposed good feelings, and they said it was an era of good feelings also because James Monroe runs unopposed
Yes.
as a Republican candidate prior to all this. What starts to happen is when John Quincy Adams decides to run for president in 1824, and he runs against Andrew Jackson. Technically, at that point, the four people that are running for president are all
It
Republicans.
was even more than that. Yeah, there were 6 people total that was actually
Hmm.
where I had some claim to let's run for president. It was basically how I like to describe it is you've watched those the primaries that they have for like a Republican or Democratic candidate today. That's really what the election of 1824 really was. It was like a
Hmm.
caucus. It was like a primary basically, and you had some people that actually did win the caucus. At first, you had 6 people. Basically, Monroe, like you were saying, Pete, he wins his second term. His second term is over. He doesn't want to. He decides, I'm good. I'm not going to run for a third term. Again, he's keeping with
Yep.
that precedent of Washington. No one should have more terms in Washington. That's
Hmm.
basically still there. And you have these 6 people that are going for it. You have Smith Thompson, who's going
Hmm.
for it. He's the Secretary of the Navy. John C. Calhoun, which is feel like he's his name is always coming around. We're going to talk about him a little bit later,
Yeah,
right?
he's like the godfather of
Yeah,
the South there.
Secretary of War. William Crawford, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, who actually did win a caucus to be the next president, but he didn't really have any real backing. So people are like, no,
Hmm.
we don't like him. Henry Clay, which is always running for president, he was the current Speaker of the House. And then, like you said,
Yeah.
the main 2 that come out of this though are John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. But he actually had 6 people. Smith
All
and
on the same Republican
all
ticket.
on the same Republican ticket. Yeah, Smith and
Yeah, there's no
Calhoun
opposition from a
quickly.
different party.
Yeah, Smith and Calhoun drop out pretty quickly. And they do that. And a lot of people are like, what about Monroe's vice president? Monroe's vice president was a man by the name of Daniel Tompkins. And he
Hmm.
was just like universally disliked as much as Monroe was liked. He was like the opposite. Plus, the guy was had like massive debt. And he wanted to run for president, but he had massive debt. He was an alcoholic and poor health. And he winds up dying 3 months after the term is over anyway. So that's one
Hmm.
reason why his name doesn't get thrown in there either. But yeah, Thompson and Calhoun drop out. Calhoun would actually go on to run for vice president.
Hmm.
But Smith and Tom, they realize when they're not going to get enough support. And it's just these 4 candidates all running at the same time. And again, it's like this primary type of race where I know you were talking about before about how the country was really together after the War of 1812. They saw each other
Hmm.
as Americans. But by 1824, this election breaks things down to being much more regional, where it depends on what part of the country you were from, really depends on which candidate you supported. And
Absolutely.
that you really see that. I mean, you see that quite a bit today. So a lot of times, this election of 1824 is referred to as one of the first modern day type of elections, especially when you get to the actual election with all the mudslinging and all the talk things
Hmm.
they were saying about each other.
Absolutely. And we should also mention, you kind of alluded to that, that by the time of 1820, 1824 rolls around and these guys are running, what would seem, again, kind of interesting in the sense that there's only one political party, you would think they'll all get along. But
And they all
while
had
they're
similar
running, the,
views. I'm sorry to interrupt. They all had
yes.
similar views for the most part. They agreed about how to do things 95% of the time, and they agreed on how things should be done. It was very similar. Again, it was basically you were voting for which personality, which
Yeah,
person
and also
you could
pure
relate to.
personality and geographical region.
Mhm.
Like this guy is the father of the West. Like Calhoun is from the South. This is who we're going to go for. And we should mention that the nation was kind of heading in the wrong direction. I mean, you have the panic of 1819, right? Where the National Bank is realizing that they need to kind of fight inflation and they start to call in loans and people start foreclosing on their farms. Banks are repossessing a lot of the farms, specifically out west. You have Missouri Compromise, which, again, at the time there was a balance between free states and slave states, which is, again, a whole nother podcast when you're talking about representation in Congress. You have the argument between, well, should we add more states that are free? Should we add more states that are slave? But this kind of showcases this idea of like that nation is starting to be kind of a little divided in a sense. And these guys, they said that this was the election of the favorite sons. I guess we should talk about both of them. So let's start with John Quincy Adams. If we're talking about who is, I guess, qualified to be the president of the United States, it does not get any better than John Quincy Adams.
Yeah, and again, he was the son, right, of John Adams, like the second president
Yep.
of the United States, and he was very similar to his father. They said in a lot of ways, and he was very smart, very intelligent. But they said a lot of times his principles really proved to be liabilities as president. He kind of did what he believed was right, and if you look at a lot of the things he did as president, he wanted to do is very progressive. Like people today would be like, "Wow, that's a very progressive liberal mindset," and he's doing it in the 1820s. Like for example, he was big into having like a national paying for people to go to college. He
wanted to create some form of a nationalized education system.
He funded science. He funded science and exploration, new inventions. He thought that was really important.
Infrastructure.
He actually overturned a case in Georgia about one of the treaties, the Creek Nation Treaty. He actually said, you know what, the federal government kind of stole this land.
From Native Americans.
The Georgian government stole this land from the Native Americans. And he just had no backing with that because most people believe that the whites deserved access to all the Indian lands. So he was able to overturn it, but then he couldn't save the tribe from getting kicked off the land anyway. And he continues to do this even once he leaves the presidency. He becomes he winds up running and winning election in the House of Representatives after that.
Yeah.
And
he stays in Congress literally until he dies. I mean, he falls over at 81 while he's in a chamber.
He's anti-slavery, not like one of these intense anti-slavery people, but he is against slavery. He's
from the North. I mean, the guy's from New England.
He was part of the Amistad case, defended the Africans in the Amistad case. I mean, he becomes a major player in history. He probably more remembered for what he does after the presidency than what he actually does as the president. Yeah, but like you said, P.I., 100%. He was. If someone was going to be born and bred to be the president, John Quincy Adams is that person. He was also a throwback to, like you said, we said before, that Federalist Party. A lot of the Federalists are people who still had some of that Federalist.
I mean, his father was literally at one point the head of the Federalist Party and the president of the United States.
They looked at him as being like, this is again like kind of like the heir apparent. He should be president. This guy.
Also, we should mention the fact that when this guy was growing up, I mean, his father, he went across the Atlantic, right, to France and later in Britain because ultimately John Adams was sent to France during the American Revolution to ask for help with Benjamin Franklin. And then later on, he became the first ambassador to England shortly thereafter, once the Revolutionary War was over. John Adams took John Quincy with him everywhere.
Yeah.
So, like, John Quincy was literally, like, 12 years old having a lunch with King George. Like, this guy was fluent in 14 languages by the time he was, like, 17. He held actual positions as an envoy to France, an official position at the age of 14. Again, he's born and bred to be a Federalist, but he starts to really kind of identify himself with a lot of the Democratic Republicans, or Republican, I should say, viewpoints. Ultimately, the Federalist Party kind of dies out, so he runs as a Republican. But before that, he became the Secretary of State to President James Monroe.
And that was a big thing. That's going to come later on because that
we're going to talk about that.
That was seen as a stepping stone to being the president.
To the presidency.
If you were the Secretary of State, you had a very good chance of becoming the president. Remember, Jefferson was Secretary of State, so for a lot of these guys were Secretary of States before they became president.
What ultimately happens here is he's unfortunately seen, though, by a lot of people out west
as being elitist, right?
As being super elitist. They're like, this guy's just snotty. He's just like a, daddy's boy. He had everything handed to him, blah, blah, blah. He was Harvard educated.
Silver spoon in his mouth.
Silver spoon in his mouth, exactly. A lot of Western states, at this time as the West is growing and Americans are moving out west, a lot of these states enticed people to move to them by giving them universal suffrage. in other words, come to our state, like Kentucky or Tennessee or so on and so forth, the further west you can go. And what you'll get in return is the ability to vote.
Yeah.
There was no more land restrictions. It was simply if you were a white male, boom, you can
And
vote.
that started to really turn the tide in the 24 and 28 elections. Just is this what's called like the poor white man going out and voting, which wasn't
Hmm.
happening before.
And that's why a lot of these poor white men are the ones that are like, yeah, this guy's too elitist for us. Like, we can't. I mean, this guy speaks 14 languages, right? He's met the King of England when he was 14 or whatever, like, or 12. We can't associate ourselves with that. They just could not somehow connect and see eye to eye with John Quincy Adams, which kind of brings us to the main person that's opposing him, and that is
Andrew Jackson. So he comes in, and Jackson has, I mean, we talked about Jackson a little bit. Everything you know about Jackson, we kind of talked about when we did the presidential assassination attempts, remember? But
mhm,
someone tried to kill him and he beat the guy with his, almost beat the guy to death with his cane. That pretty much
yeah,
sums up a lot to do with Jackson. So he
yes,
presented himself like the everyman, right? Old Hickory. Yeah, the Battle of
yeah,
New Orleans. He fought in the Indian Wars. I mean, this Jackson was a very intense individual, and he really, the people of the West and the South really looked to him as like a larger than life figure. So you're talking about
and also,
personality. Jackson had
yeah,
personality.
and also he was what was known as the self-made man.
Yeah,
What's crazy is that he actually the guy came from nothing. He was pretty much raised as an army brat.
yeah.
I mean, he was raised by the military from a very young
And
age.
he was scarred by the British, I believe, right?
Yes, in American
The British.
Revolutionary War, he was a little kid, and a British soldier rode up on a horse and told him to clean his shoes. And
Jackson
Jackson
said,
cursed him out as a little kid,
yeah.
so the guy
Slashed
slashed
him
him
with a
with
sword and a
a
scar on his face.
sword.
Yeah, so he
Yeah.
hated the British. That goes into this whole
Oh, he hated the British.
1812 stuff. Yeah.
After the War of 1812, obviously, there's a little gap here before he runs in 1824. There's another thing that makes him even more popular, and that is when President James Monroe sends Andrew Jackson as U.S. Army general down to the Georgia-Florida border when Florida was still owned by the Spaniards, and he was supposed to make sure that the Seminole Indians that were raiding Georgian towns would stop doing so, because the premise was that the Seminoles would raid Georgia towns and then go back into Spanish Florida, where we had no jurisdiction to chase them into. So Andrew Jackson goes in there and he kind of ignores the orders and invades Florida
Mm-hmm.
in the name of the United States, kills tons of Native Americans, including a lot of Spanish officials, and ultimately claims Florida for the United States. James Monroe is like, oh my goodness, this is going to start a war with
He didn't want it to
Spain.
go that far.
The people, though, are like, heck yeah, like, we want this land. This is awesome, right? He just got us
Yeah,
more land.
he's doing what he wants to do. He's out manifest destiny idea, but it's also just they like this guy because he's doing what they all thought. He's actually doing it.
Yes.
Jackson, you can say what you want about him, but he did what he thought was right, and he did it when
Yep.
he decided to do something. He committed to it.
Right. Funny enough, when he runs in 1824, he's running as a Republican. I mean, the Democratic Party
Democratic
that
Republic.
he creates doesn't happen until after the election of 1824.
Yes.
So,
So we have the election, right? You have
yep.
those
And
people. Crawfield. I'm sorry, Pete. Crawfield.
yeah, go ahead. You go. Yeah, go.
Crawford has a stroke, so he's kind of not there as much anymore.
Hmm.
But what happened? But during this time, the candidates themselves, they didn't do what you see now when they go out and campaign. Their
Hmm.
followers campaigned for them, right?
Hmm.
They were the one. Their supporters were the ones that campaigned for them, and so that's what they started doing all around the country. The big thing in this election was they rewrote songs. That's what I was reading about. I saw a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So they rewrote these like popular songs of the time to even support their candidate or mock the other ones. And that was really what you were seeing. And so people would be singing these songs, kind of making fun of Calhoun, making fun of Jackson or supporting Jackson, depending on which side you were on. And that's just how it basically worked. And then they voted, and the voting back then wasn't just one day.
Yeah, it started in October, went
October,
through December.
Yeah, and December 2nd.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of time to actually vote. Obviously, the logistics of voting was a little bit different in 1824 than in 2020.
When everything's tallied, Jackson had 99 electoral votes.
You needed
Right.
131. I just want to emphasize that. You needed 131 at that time to win the Electoral College.
Yes, he was 32 short of a majority, right? So Jackson has 99 electoral votes. Adams comes in second with 84, Crawford 41, and Clay 37, right?
Yes.
So according to the Constitution, Amendment 12, the House of Representatives had to choose a president from 3 highest names on the
So
list,
that would be
right?
Jackson, Adams, and Crawford. And Crawford had a stroke, so it definitely wasn't going to be him.
Yeah.
Little side
And
note.
Clay,
Little side note. Sorry,
go ahead.
Calhoun is elected vice. So we have a vice president. It was different then. People were running. It was like a party ticket that didn't happen
Hmm.
yet. So Calhoun gets 182 votes. So he's the vice president. That's going to come in play later on too, because Calhoun does something interesting in the election of 1828.
This is the beginning of this, what becomes known as a corrupt bargain, because Clay is out of the race, right? But he throws his support to Adams.
He does hate Jackson. Well,
Yeah,
he doesn't see Jackson as presidential.
exactly.
He says
He saw him as like a hick from the West,
exactly.
basically.
Like he's a famous quote. He says, "It's all right. He killed 2,500 British in the Battle of New Orleans. How does that qualify him for being president?" You have to understand, before this, everyone that was president of the United States was from the Northeast, right? They were from Virginia or they were from Massachusetts. That was it.
Yep.
So it's the only states producing
Yep.
presidents up to 1828.
Essentially, what starts to kind of happen here is Adam wins, right, on the first ballot in the House. And we should also mention that what was Henry Clay's job? He was the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
So by Henry Clay throwing his hat behind Adams, he kind of orchestrated the House of Representatives to choose Adams. So Adams wins on the first ballot in the House. He receives the votes of 13 states as opposed to 7 for Jackson and 4 for Crawford.
Yeah, he becomes the sixth president.
Technically, this was perfectly fair and constitutional, right? And even Andrew Jackson was one of the first ones to congratulate Adams, right, on his inauguration day. Like, all was well until,
Well, what makes it
right?
unique too, and we'll get back to that, is Jackson did win the popular vote.
Yes,
he won
he did
41% of the vote. And what happens with this? He becomes the only. There's like a trivia question. Whatever. He becomes the only only candidate to have the most electoral votes, but not become president, because he did have 99 electoral votes when it started. And it's the first of what will become, I think, 4 times, right? Yeah, 4 times that the person who wins the popular vote does not become president. But like you said, Jackson's okay with it. He's actually okay with it until some more information comes out.
Yes. So Jackson, again, congratulates Adams. He's like, hey, all right, it is what it is.
Like they do have similar ways of government.
And then Adams does the unthinkable in the eyes of Andrew Jackson. He appoints Henry Clay his Secretary of State. And that's when, like, poop hits the fan.
They almost immediately start calling it what we said, this corrupt bargain. It's the idea. Yes. And then Jackson and his followers are saying this is the elitist. They have this conspiracy against the common man. They want to force themselves in power. They want to force their elitist ways on the rest of the country. Now, Clay and Adams both deny this, that's what happened, that Clay said, hey, I'll make sure the House votes for you if you make me Secretary of State. And there's been no way that you're never going to prove it one way or the other. All right? Could it have happened? It very definitely could have happened, because that's how politics works.
And as you mentioned before, this was seen as like a dynasty of the Secretary of State. Yeah. I mean, think about it.
He wanted that position because he wanted to be president. He think that's going to be right, and it winds up totally ruining him politically.
If you think of George Washington, his Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. He became president. Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State was James Madison. He became president. James Madison's Secretary of State was James Monroe. He became president. James Monroe's Secretary of State was John Quincy Adams. He just became president. So when John Quincy Adams names Henry Clay to this position of Secretary of State, Jackson now sees this like, okay, they stole this election from me. I won the popular vote. This was not fair. They stole it from me, and they're already trying to ensure that I don't come back. And at this point, you have Andrew Jackson says, you know what, screw this. This isn't democracy. He goes, this is a farce. And he goes out there and he creates a brand new political party.
He does this almost instantly. You're right, Pete. I guess right away, like right after the election. It's actually before Adams is even in the White House.
Yeah. And the new party is called the Democrats.
Democratic Party, yep.
Yep. So now we are going for the next election, right? We're going to have 2 political parties. And the next election, as you mentioned, starts before the first one's even over. Right away, you have Jackson and his supporters are like, we're just going to make John Quincy Adams' life miserable.
And they do. Well, the big thing is you have the midterm elections. You had those back then, right? So in 1826, a lot of these, what they start calling themselves Jacksonians, these followers of Jackson, the Jacksonian Democracy, Jacksonian Democrats, they win a lot of seats in Congress. So right there, that just kind of makes Adams almost like a lame duck in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And they start criticizing and going at everything he tries to do. They're calling him an elitist. They're saying that he does not respect the common man, those sorts of things. Which that was just kind of the perception already that people had of Adams, right? That we talked about before. That Adams didn't really want to associate with the ordinary man. And now everything he does, they're just calling him out about that. And particularly the big thing that I saw came up a couple of times was the tariff of 1828, which actually increased tariffs by 60%, and it was known as a tariff of abominations, and that just turned the South completely against Adams. If there was any supporters still in the South for Adams, that was gone with this tariff. So you really was regionalized by the election of 1828 when the Northerners supporting Adams and they become the National Republicans. They're basically the ones supporting Adams, and then you had everyone from the South, the Democrats, were supporting Jackson.
The northern manufacturers in the North, right? Manufacturing kind of kicks off and starts off during the War of 1812, like, 10, 15 years prior, because we were fighting against England, whom we would normally get most of our manufactured goods from. And as a result, we couldn't get it from them because we were fighting against them. So we had to create our own factories up north. And that's what we did. But once the War of 1812 ended, all these new American industries needed to be protected because England was going to flood our markets with cheap goods all over again and basically destroy competition.
It was a trade war. It was a trade war.
Yeah. So what this tariff that is passed is definitely, as you said, Tom, viewed as something that benefits the North, because by having, and at the time, this was the largest tariff, in American history on foreign products and foreign goods. What it did is it made American goods cheaper by subsequently making British and French and other goods more expensive. So that way it enticed people to purchase American. However, when you look at the South's economy was based almost entirely, if not entirely, on exports. And they exported to these different nations. And because the United States now was, taxing these other nations with such high tariffs, these other nations retaliated by also taxing American products going to them. And it just so happens that the American products that were going to them were the raw materials from the South. Yeah. So the South is losing tons of money over this. And they're seeing this whole thing as like, John Quincy Adams is only benefiting his northern constituents. He's only benefiting the northern bankers and more elitist people. Yep. What about us common man folk? What about our, I wouldn't say middle class because that's not a thing yet, but what about us? No. And this is where Andrew Jackson's like, well, I'm here for you guys.
I'm one of you. I'm from Tennessee. I get it. He was a farmer. So he's like,
yep.
I understand what you're going through. I will get rid of the national bank. That becomes his big thing, right? Get rid of the national
Although
bank.
He said he was a farmer. Have you ever been to his plantation?
No.
So I've been to his plantation, and I think saying a farmer is kind of like an understatement. It's like saying that George Washington was a farmer. But yeah.
Well, we have those too. What are the people, you can classify yourself as a farmer if you grow Christmas trees.
Just have land.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what happens during these 4 years, and you kind of touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, John Quincy Adams, especially after the midterm elections, he gets nothing done apart from this one terrible tariff that alienates, 2/3 of the nation.
And Jackson, his supporters are just thorns in his side. Like they're just ripping into him. Like whenever he has a chance to do anything or saying whatever he says, whatever he does, they're just attacking him. And it doesn't help that, again, that idea that Adams is kind of an elitist, because he actually states when he wouldn't even campaign for his own reelection. And he's like, no, he would say, if the country wants me to be their president, they will show me. She will show me. And they're just like, dude, you have to go out there and at least talk about it. And his supporters did a lot. And this is another thing that happens. I guess you want to get into the actual election now a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to do that. Yeah,
so because this election
of 1828,
this election gets nasty. Their Adams supporters really do go after Jackson, and Jackson goes back to them too. But they're talking about how Jackson killed the Native Americans, how he killed how he killed his people in duels. But then it gets personal. They're calling Jackson's mother, writing stories how Jackson's mother was a prostitute, and they go after Jackson's wife Rachel. And this is why one thing that enrages Jackson to no point. When they go after his wife and call her all types of different names and really attack her physically.
Well, we could call they called her a whore.
Yeah.
Literally, and I quote, And the reason for that
And that's
is
a huge. I
because
mean, that's an insult today, but that is like a you
oh please
in
yes.
the 1820s. That is a huge
And they
insult
did this in
to say
newspapers.
things of
This
that
was like
nature.
this is in newspapers. And they did this
It was
because
published. It was actually published. Yeah.
yes, Andrew Jackson met Rachel when she was still married to somebody else. And she did not
Yes.
really secure a divorce yet when she started hooking up with Andrew Jackson. And they kind of, fell in love and they wound up getting married. But the problem is that she was still married. So when when all the paperwork went through and she officially got divorced, Andrew Jackson and Rachel like remarried again. But this is what was being kicked up again. This idea of like, hey, listen, like that's
I
not
don't think
gonna,
she was even living with this guy for years before
no,
that.
not at all.
But it was a scandal of that time. And what happens is, I guess, well, after Jackson, we
Yeah,
know
go ahead.
Jackson wins. Rachel actually dies. She passes away. She was in poor
Yeah.
health, and Jackson blames Adams and his campaign for pushing her over the edge for all that stress. And he blames him. He actually tells them, you killed my wife. I will not
Yeah.
forget that. And Jackson is not someone that is going to forget. So really anything Adams, anything that the Democratic Republicans basically wanted to do or had already put in place, he was just going to destroy. Because as far as he said, they took away what he loved and his wife. And so he's going to take away anything that they did.
Yep. And this was going definitely back and forth. This idea of, there were also, of course,
well, they made fun of Adams too, right?
Yeah, and so Adams had things thrown his way as well. This actually became known as the mudslinging campaigns because these guys, it wasn't, as you mentioned kind of before, this was not about politics. This was about character, and this was about
again, they had the same policies for the most part.
Yes, and where geographically are you from? What kind of people are you representing? John Quincy Adams loved to play pool.
Yeah, I saw this part. Yeah.
Did you hear that one? Yeah. So like he bought a billiards table for the White House, which he purchased with his own money, by the way. Brings it to the White House, and he loved to play pool with his son. And the newspaper starts saying how he's turning the White House into a gambling center.
Yeah, because he bought that in a chessboard.
Yes, the chessboard. He's like, it's gambling. You turn the White House into a gambling center. And then the other thing that came out is that at one point, Adams was actually the ambassador to Russia.
Yeah, I saw this one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one.
Yeah.
So the newspaper started saying that John Quincy Adams, while ambassador to Russia when he was younger, he actually provided young American virgins for the Tsar of Russia.
They gave her a girl as a present, like a young 12-year-old girl as a present to the Tsar of Russia. Like gifted her.
John Quincy Adams, John Quincy Adams, like, what? Like, what are you talking about? But these are the kind of things that are being published every single day. It's just like a tax on character.
And people are going to believe what they want. This is, the beginning of, I guess, what would you call it today? Fake news, right?
Right. I mean, what else would you call it?
We can say that without getting in trouble, right? Fake news.
I guess we could say.
If we're referring to it from the 1820s. That's why it's a lot of times called a modern campaign.
Yeah. And Jackson crushes Adams on election day.
Right,
actually,
he wins 50% of the vote.
Yeah. Yes.
170 total votes.
Right. And he only needed what?
131.
To win.
Basically, what happens is, sorry, Pete, Quincy Adams holds the same states that his father does, and wins the same ones that when his father won when his father lost to Jefferson. But Jackson is winning all the southern states. He's winning those states, so he wins in a pretty much a landslide. And one reason is because you have these poor men going out to vote. And it's the largest voter turnout up to that point, obviously, because so many more people are voting. You have over 57%, I think it was 57.6% of the population, again, that could vote. The white men voted, and Jackson wins overwhelmingly.
Yeah. You know what I want to bring up? We didn't really mention last time when the election of 1824. So you know how we said that Jackson winds up winning the popular vote? He actually won 153,000 popular votes to 114,000 for Adams during the initial election. But at that time, 6 states that contained like 1/4 of the entire population of the country, they didn't even count popular votes. It was just the electors chosen by legislators. And out of those 4 states, only one gave his vote to Jackson, South Carolina. So who's to say that potentially the first time around, Jackson might not have won the popular vote?
If they
and Adams maybe did.
Counted,
But this time around, there's absolutely no...
Oh, yeah, and Adams Jackson goes nuts. He actually invites people to the White House. I'm sure you saw this.
Yes.
And they have this party at the White House, and they just come inside. Like they're outside, and they eventually like, let's just go inside. And Adams is still there. Adams and his staff and his family are still living in the White House. Jackson wasn't sworn in yet as president. And they actually run out the back door. They flee because in comes all of these people from like Tennessee and all these other states, basically like hillbillies and stuff like that. And they're ransacking the White House. They're drunk.
Yeah.
They're going crazy. They're loving their victory. And then
Yeah.
months later, when Jackson becomes president, he invites 20,000 people over to the White House. And they do it
Yeah.
again. And they actually
and that same night, he actually he has to sleep in a hotel room because
they trashed the White House.
they trashed the White House.
Yeah.
They supposedly start like throwing the China that belonged to George Washington.
Yeah, a lot of stuff gets
everything.
like destroyed at this time. Yeah, they're like, oh man. And Jackson's kind of like, all right, went a little bit too far with that. But
yeah. And that's what newspapers said the next day, especially in the North. They're like, look at this. You're elected this backwards guy.
Look who you're elected, and look what happens. Yeah.
But, and again, this is not meant to be a podcast about Andrew Jackson. However, he does usher in an era, of some more male universal suffrage.
Oh, he presents it as a common man. He does begin that whole idea of getting more people to vote, encouraging the rural vote, right? That rural vote, the non-aristocrat vote to go out there. Another interesting thing about this election is John C. Calhoun, who was John Quincy Adams' vice president, actually decides to switch and become Jackson's vice president. He supports and runs with Jackson in 1828.
Until he doesn't.
Until he doesn't. Well, then he'll eventually be Martin Van Buren. Yeah. But
because they basically clash over different policies with Andrew Jackson.
And Van Buren is really the architect who helped get Jackson elected. He's the one that really stirred people up. He's the one that really encouraged get all those rural individuals out to vote. Mm-hmm. And Jackson rewards him by making sure that he becomes president after Jackson's term.
A lot of people don't realize, and especially my students, I always tell them, when I say Andrew Jackson, they often throw out, Trail of Tears. Mm-hmm. But the Trail of Tears actually happens during Van Buren's presidency.
Yeah. Jackson has a lot of other things.
He sets the whole thing in motion.
He sets everything in motion with the Native Americans, without a doubt, which was really weird because Jackson had a Native American son. He adopted a Native, but he killed their family. So like it's kind of like, I killed your family, now I'm going to adopt you and raise you. So he's a
dichotomy is insane.
He's lack of a better term, interesting. Just like studying him is just. On one hand, he does one thing. On the other hand, he does something else. It's just intense. Like there's a lot. Yeah. He's an interesting fella. He's got a lot of layers, I guess you could say. Like isn't that what Shrek says about ogres? Ogres have layers. Same thing. Andrew Jackson has layers, without a doubt.
So there are a few fun facts, I guess, about these gentlemen, and as well as this election. I mean, the one thing I have about, the obvious, I guess, for John Quincy Adams, he is the second president ever in the United States history to lose an election and not get a second term. The first being his father.
They were both one-term presidents.
Yeah, the first two one-term presidents. But they're also the first pair of father-son presidents.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, that's a fun fact. There's one other fact that John Quincy Adams used to, they said he dressed, for someone that was super wealthy, if you knew him, they said he dressed kind of like a bum.
I heard that too, yeah. He was just very unkempt, basically.
Very unkempt dude. And he was very super studious. Think of him as kind of nerdy in a sense. And while he lived a simple life, he used to get up at 5 a.m., right? He used to build his fire, read his daily portion of the Bible, right? Then he would take his walk, and he would love to swim. He used to actually skinny dip. He used to go skinny dipping in the Potomac River. And at one time, one of Jackson's supporters actually stole his clothes.
Yes, I remember that. That was something I remember.
Yeah, he couldn't get out of water, so he found some boy was running by.
They just did anything they could to mess with the guy. They just made his life. It's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but
it's funny.
They picked on this guy. This was bullying. They did anything they could to make.
It's the president. I know.
They didn't care. That's the craziness. And this is in the 1820s. I mean, now if you look and watch what Saturday Night Live and all those things, to say about the presidents and stuff like that, going all the way back to Gerald Ford, even right. These characters, they were doing this in the 1820s too, with the caricatures and with just mocking them. But the Jacksonians, anything they could do to make Adams' life miserable, they did. Oh, we know he's skinny. Let's just steal his clothes and run off. Ha ha ha. Anything they could do.
They were successful. I mean, as you mentioned before, he remained the worst beaten president until President Taft like 80 years later. I mean, he was destroyed by Andrew Jackson.
I just see a lot of parallels with modern day type of elections now. That you just see them,
and we have to, and also the parallels being that like Andrew Jackson was very unconventional.
Yes, he was.
I mean,
he wasn't a career politician. Sound familiar? And,
no.
We'll get into this a little bit.
Yeah.
President Donald Trump's favorite president, he has said, is Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
He has Andrew Jackson's portrait hanging in his office. Presidents typically put the president that they want to emulate, that they want to look up to, inspired by, in their Oval Office with them. Like Obama had Lincoln, and then when Trump took over, he put in Jackson. He Jacksonian democracy for the people. I mean, that's what Trump ran on, right? The whole idea of make America great again. That mantra is very similar to, I'm the common man, the champion of the common man that Jackson had. So there are parallels there, without a doubt.
Yeah. And we should also mention that Henry Clay never made it to the White House.
Henry Clay. He tries. How many times? He runs like a lot, right? It was like 6 times.
He does, yes. And
I mean, you got to give the guy a chance. You got to give the guy credit for like trying. He doesn't give up, but he never really had a chance either. Like it was just like, man. Like, every time they thought he might have had a chance, and someone else comes and beats, like a newcomer comes, like it's Jackson. And he's just like, oh man.
And even when he makes a corrupt bargain, what I mean? Like, okay, this is my way in. I'm going to be the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, I'm qualified. And he was definitely, if you want to look at someone who has the qualifications that could do the job, he probably could have done the job. He just didn't have that charisma. And Jackson just makes sure that it'll never happen either with that corrupt bargain he choice. But like we said, Quincy Adams has a very good influential political career after he's the president, being in the House. So
yeah, and that's actually he was one of the first presidents to be photographed. John Quincy Adams actually might be the first president to be photographed. The first photograph of a sitting, I just Googled it. Office holder was John Quincy Adams, and then sitting president was William Henry Harrison. So
yeah, that's right. That was the first inauguration. Harrison.
Yeah. All right. Well, see, there's crazy elections out there. It's not just 2020.
Yeah. Oh, there's been plenty of crazy elections out there.
That's what politics is. So I guess we should just remind everyone before we go that we are online. We have a website at historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. We're also at History Teachers Talking on Facebook, and we also have a Twitter. Did we say we're going to do something positive? I guess this was semi-positive, lighthearted.
Yeah, it was a little more lighthearted again because you're looking at an election that happened over 100 years ago, so you're able to almost 200 years ago, really.
Yeah.
So, and this again, it's showing that history does repeat itself.
Hey, who knows? Maybe one day in 200 years, someone's going to be talking about this election.
I'm sure they will be. I'm sure they will.
We'll be gone. We'll be gone by then.
I'm sure they'll be looking at it. Yes, in some way, shape, or form.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see everyone next week.
Stay safe, everyone. Stay safe.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.